Welcome, everyone, and especially our distinct guest, Adam Pendleton. For those who don't know me, my name is Sabine Eckman, and I'm the director and chief curator here at the museum. It is my pleasure today to introduce the conversation between Adam Pendleton and Meredith Malone. The occasion, as you all know, is the exciting and much anticipated opening of the exhibition Adam Pendleton to Divide By, a major solo exhibition that comprises a selection of his work that he executed during the past 5 years. It encompasses all of the museum's special exhibition galleries and includes new paintings, drawings, and ceramics, as well as 2 recent film portraits. The exhibition will be on view until January 15th, and a fully illustrated catalog will accompany the exhibition and is forthcoming in November. This exhibition continues the museum's most recent explorations of contemporary abstract painting and follows Katharina Gross's Returns, Revisions, Inventions exhibition from last fall. It is rather difficult to characterize Adam's complex paintings and films or his approach to abstraction in a few words. We will in a moment hear more about his artistic practice in death, but maybe that much. His work with materials such as pigments and inks, supports such as a flat canvas, abstract shapes, color, and distinct application techniques, layered processes of making, including multiple mediums, demonstrate somewhat dissonant sensibilities, shifting quickly from minimalist approaches to all-over appearances. His mesmerizing and beautiful canvases, beauty, of course, is never innocent, it dwells on opacity as they resist categorization and transgress learned anticipations, such as the livelihood of painting, in particular the affective qualities of abstract painting. Vital to Adam's work, as he himself has pointed out, is his invention and practice of Black Dada. Rather than committing to the radical negation strategies of the historical avant-garde, he appears to activate with the concept of Black Dada another form of radicalism, performative interventions resulting in continuous mutations and the loosening of any and all fixities. Rather than objectification and representation, Pendleton, one might argue, liberates through his reflexive practice painting from itself. In this form of abstraction, all customary elements, including the artist himself, continuously escape meaning, classification, and appropriation. This ambitious and thought-provoking exhibition was made possible by the leadership support of the William T. Kemper Foundation. Major support is provided by Sotheby's. All exhibitions at the Mildred Kemper Art Museum are supported by members of the Director's Circle, with major annual support provided by Emily and Teddy Greenspan, and additional generous annual support from Michael Foreman and Jennifer Rice, Julie Kemper-Foyer, Joanne Gold and Andrew Stern, Ron and Pamela Mass, and Kim and Bruce Olson. Further support is provided by the Missouri Arts Council Estate Agency, the Hortense Lewin Art Fund, the Ken and Nancy Kranzberg Fund, and other members of the Mildred Kemper Art Museum. It is really wonderful to have so many out-of-town guests joining us tonight. Julie Kemper-Foyer and Emily Greenspan from the Art Collections Committee, Max Teicher, I'm supposed to say, and Andrea Crane from Agency 291, Sam Rubel from Pace Gallery, Anna Fisher, and James Lavender from Kordansky Galleries. Finally, and not least important, is Jessica Kitts from Adam's studio. Thank you so much for all of you, to joining us tonight. Exhibitions such as these would not be possible without the dedicated support of the Kemper Art Museum staff. Special thanks go to Jane Neidhart and Holly Tasker from Publications, Mark Ryan and Kristen Good from the Exhibition Department, Meredith Lehman and her large-scale education staff, Ron Weaver and the installation crew. I also want to thank Marketing and Advancement for their much-needed support. Special thanks to Sarah Sligo. And very special thanks to Emma Thomas for her all-around support and admirable organizational skills. Our genuine appreciation is due to Carmen Colangelo, Dean of the Sam Fox School, Beverly Wendland, and Provost, and Andrew Martin, Chancellor, for their very committed and enthusiastic support of the museum. It really is time to introduce tonight's speakers. Meredith Malone, the curator of the exhibition, is curator here at the museum and responsible for post-war and contemporary art. In her role, she has organized and curated and co-curated a myriad of exhibitions, many of them accompanied by important publications, including Tomasz Saracino, Cloud Specific, Cosima von Bonin, Character Appropriation, To See Without Being Seen, Contemporary Art and Drone Warfare, Nicole Miller, A Sound, A Signal, The Circus, Multiplied, Edition Matte, and the Transformable Work of Art, and Chance Aesthetics. She also conceived many rotations of the museum's permanent, especially contemporary collection, and is curating the video gallery. Several permanent and temporary commissions go to her credit. The selection and installation of Cosmic Filaments, a commission for the new museum lobby by Saracino, and Christina Sun Kim, Stacking Traumas, for the museum's atrium wall. Meredith also proposed and facilitated acquisitions by such artists as Armand Turquoise Dyson, Marcel Duchamp, Nicole Eisenman, Andrea Fraser, Chitra Ganesh, Rashid Johnson, Adam Pendleton, Man Ray, Martha Rosler, and Rose B. Simpson, to name a few. To turn to Adam. Adam Pendleton was born in Richmond, Virginia, and moved to New York at the age of 18. In between, he completed the Art Space Independent Study Program in Pietrasanta, Italy in 2002. His work has been featured in major museums and galleries around the world, including solo exhibitions at the Baltimore Museum of Art, Le Consortium Dijon, Indianapolis Museum of Contemporary Art, Kunstwerke Institute for Contemporary Art Berlin, Museum of Contemporary Art Cleveland, and Museum of Contemporary Art Denver, among many others. Recent important exhibitions and installations include Adam Pendleton, Blackness, White and Light at the Museum Moderne Kunststiftung Ludwig Wien, Vienna, Whitney Biennial, Quiet as It's Kept at the Whitney Museum of American Art, New York, Adam Pendleton, These Things We Have Done Together at the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts, and Adam Pendleton, Who's the Queen, at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Pendleton's work is part of numerous public and private collections, including the Carnegie Museum of Art in Pittsburgh, the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum in New York, the Museum of Contemporary Art Chicago, the Museum of Contemporary Art San Diego, the Museum of Modern Art New York, the Studio Museum in Harlem, Tate London, and the Kemper Art Museum. Central to Adam's practice are, moreover, publications, hybrids between artist books and anthologies. They include As Heavy as Sculpture, Pasts, Futures, and Aftermaths, Revisiting the Black Dada Reader, Who's the Queen, Elements of Me and Black Dada Reader, among many others. In 2020, Pendleton founded DABA, a small press for books on art, experimental writing, and visual poetry. He continues to live and work in Brooklyn, New York. And with this rather long introduction, I turn it over to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Sabina. That was wonderful, very thorough. You said it all. Before we get started, I just want to say what a pleasure it is to have you here, Adam. We've been talking about this exhibition for a couple of years now, and it has been just an incredibly rewarding collaboration. So I just wanted to say thank you. I also want to say, so we will enter into a conversation for a little while, and then we will be certain to leave it open to questions for the audience at the end. So welcome.
Thank you, Meredith. If I can just take a moment to say thank you to Sabina and the incredible institution that you direct. And there's some other people who I just want to take a moment to thank. From my studio, I would like to thank my incredible production team. And I like to name them by name so that even though they are not here, it will go out spiritually, so to speak. And hopefully I don't forget anyone, but a new addition to the team, Edwin O'Brien, Christina Draper, Zach Botham, Jason Schultz, Travis Hewitt-Roach, Tyler Bance, Yin Yin Chu, Jessica might have to help me, Jara May, and Hudson Cook, yes. And of course, I have to thank Jessica Kitts profoundly, who was the project manager for this exhibition. Thanks for your tireless work and all of your beautiful and thoughtful efforts throughout this process. I also want to thank Tim Brennan from Frederick Tang Architecture, who's sitting next to Jessica, who has been an architectural partner on a number of exhibitions and helped realize the beautiful and incredible black rectangle that occupies one of the gallery spaces here at the Kemper. It's great to collaborate, Tim, with you and Fred on so many projects. And lastly, Meredith, what an incredible time we have had. What an incredible conversation. What an incredible collaborative space we shared and opened with each other. It has been an absolute pleasure. Your scholarship, your sense of dedication, how serious you are, how committed you are. This has been an absolute and tremendous pleasure. So thank you.
Thank you, Adam. That really
Absolutely.
That means a lot. So let's get started. Let's talk a little bit.
Yes.
I thought we could start off with giving people a sense of sort of the genesis of this particular project. Knowing that it's kind of come to fruition over a period of time, I wonder if you want to say, maybe this isn't the easiest question to start off with, a little bit about, what you wanted to get out of this project. What makes this project, somewhat unique amongst, all the other amazing things that you've done. Particularly, I think even when you've been here, we've talked a little bit about how it's been exciting to see how your practice has evolved. Even, since we started talking about 3 years ago, this show really does have this very marked emphasis on abstract composition. So maybe that could be a good place to start. Do you want to say a little bit about?
Sure. So, each exhibition is a kind of a wager, a kind of move towards or into the unknown. You really don't know what's going to happen, or I don't know what's going to happen. Maybe you are able to see into the future better than I am, but I really don't know what's going to happen. So the first thing that I respond to is what is known. and that is the space of the exhibition, the space that the work will reside in. So that is where I begin to operate from. The biggest unknown, which you touched on, is how the work is going to change from the time the opportunity of an exhibition presents itself to when it is actually staged. And I have a habit, good or bad, of basically working until I cannot work anymore, as you have discovered. Because Meredith would often say, well, do you think anything else will change, Adam? Do you? And I was like, well, you know, you never know. You know?
Down till yesterday, really.
down to the wire. But that, I think, is the liveliness, what is vital and what is crucial about exhibition making. And I think one of the biggest surprises in this exhibition is this sort of very poetic turn towards abstraction as a mode, method of representation. So if I think about representation as a kind of fact of existence, perhaps, and I would argue, a dubious fact of existence, or how we interpret and understand each other, that there is something authentically real and vital about abstraction as a mode and method of representation, and one that I ascribe to.
I wonder if we could go a little bit, I mean, I love that, and that's something that has been an ongoing part of the dialogue that we have had. I wonder if you could go a little bit deeper with your, your notion of abstraction is so excitingly like multi-dimensional as well. You know, as you just said, you use it as it's a mode, it's a method. We've also talked about this, a bit of a push-pull, as a mechanism too for you as well. Could you speak to that, the idea of it as both, and if I'm putting words in your mouth, let me know, both kind of an act of refusal almost sometimes, but also active engagement. And maybe that active engagement, I wonder if that's something you could say a little bit more. Engagement like on your part, but also you're constantly thinking, it seems to me, the role of the viewer as well when they're engaged with your works. When you're thinking about how you come up with like an exhibition concept as well, but also when you're making the works. I don't know if that's a little muddied.
A part of what I'm interested is touching on and illustrating, but to illustrate, not to explicate, but to illustrate, to complicate a notion of a compositional logic of we, for one, and I think that's very much so where the viewer or the audience comes into play. This idea that the artwork is a site of engagement, and it is completed, or it comes into a kind of existence, or a kind of contingent existence when the viewer encounters it and tries to make a kind of sense of it. And one of the tenets of abstraction, as I understand it, that I adhere to, is making the case that not everything exists to be understood. It can simply exist to be present, to be encountered, to simply exist in the world. So abstraction is this kind of rich and fruitful, yet elusive opportunity to create a rich and meaningful encounter and dialogue with a viewer and or an audience, however one wants to think about it.
Well, why don't we actually look at a work? I thought we could start with talking a little bit about painting specifically. The exhibition includes two incredible bodies of painting, including the Untitled We Are Not series and the Untitled Days series. And here we're seeing one. This painting, I don't know, do you think it's actually about this scale in real life? It's about 20 feet long, right? When you go into the gallery space. Could you talk a little bit about, painting as a medium, as an important, maybe one of the primary forms that you're working with? But also talk a little bit, you come at painting through an interesting kind of circuitous process. And I know we've talked about it a little bit the past couple of days, but I think it would be wonderful if you could talk a little bit about the role of painting and also your approach to the medium.
I mean, to put it quite simply, I am a painter, for and foremost. And I think one of the things unique about the way in which I understand myself as a painter is I am preoccupied with the ways in which ideas can exist in the world. So my paintings are formal, and these are going to be strange words to use. They're formal devices or tools, but they're also interested in exploring in nuanced ways, not simply through informal ways, theoretical positions and dispositions. So a painting like this, for example, does that by using as material language. And language so often operates as a signal or a sign to make us think this is to be read or this is to be understood, or this is to be heard. But again, this idea to hear, to speak, not to be understood, but just to hear or just to speak, that might seem like a kind of useless difference and or subtle, but there's something very deep there. To speak, just to be heard, the sound or the gesture. And you'll see how I kind of will oscillate and use that language, sound or gesture, and then you can think about gesture or sound simply in the act of painting, of making a mark, the gesture of a drip, a splatter, a spray. So I kind of conflate these distinctions and maybe even these positions.
Well, I wonder, since you brought up language and we're looking at this work, I wonder if you could talk about, and I like how you're talking about gesture and sound, because for me, like these works are, they're very noisy in a way too. You're using this particular phrase in this body of work, "we are not." You're repeating it over and over again. So the meaning of it, like you said, it demands to be read almost, but then also it's kind of that there's an element of refusal in that, or it quickly starts to break down. Can you talk about the phrasing that you're using in the paintings? Like, where is this coming from? The words.
So this language, and yes, the core phrase is "we are not," but it also reads, "we not are not, we not are, we not we are not, are, we are not," right? And so forth. So this kind of idea of defining something through negation, not a series of statements of "I am this, I am that," or we are, but we are not. So negation as an opportunity for meaning, for a sense of collective meaning, this idea of the individual in relationship to the idea of the relationship of the individual to the collective. So here, when I look at this painting, for example, I see all of the electricity of painting, these broad abstract gestures, this dimensionally rich space, but I also see a chorus of voices.
And as we've talked in that space, I love, it's beautiful, this idea of kind of moving, you're using this negation as actually kind of a form of possibility in the sense.
Yes.
It also ultimately becomes, and you have said this, it ultimately, the more you stand there, it's almost asking a question, right, of if we are not, then who are we? Who is this we? This we seems to always be heterogeneous for you, right, exactly, and shifting and pivoting. And maybe this is, I think, one of the most, something I've been thinking about a lot is one of the first conversations that we had where I was asking you about, as a curator, I want to know exactly how you made this thing. How is this? Because when you look at them in person, ultimately they're silk screened. So there's an intense amount of complexity here, visual depth, but they're also very, very flat. So we had talked, you actually go through a rather, again, I say the circuitous process when you make these works, right? You start in your spray room, using a variety of paints to produce works that then get photographed, and then they get turned into silk screens in the end. So there's multiple steps that you're going through. And I remember asking you, what is that kind of mediation? What is that a negation of painting for you? I guess I want to, I was wondering if it, was it a rejection of a certain kind of subjectivity associated with painting? And I remember you telling me, no, that wasn't the position that you were coming at it from. It was really about not being any one thing. Do you remember saying that?
I don't remember saying that. That must have been a Tuesday.
Well, for me, it was a profound moment. So I thought you, it just said something to me that the idea of you're interested in it as much as like the transformation, the relationship between these different media, as you were in like the final product.
That
itself,
is absolutely
Yeah.
true, right? I'm very interested in blurring these distinctions between mediums, right? Between, in some real sense, writing, which it's actually isn't one that I say often, but these distinctions between, let's say, writing, photography, painting, and drawing. But I was also sitting here thinking, maybe this is painting for the 21st century. And I think I could expand on that in multiple ways, but one of the ways in which I could expand on that is this, there's no central focus in these paintings. There's not, say, a figure at the center of it, or an apple, or even one gesture. There are multiple gestures. They're arguably paintings within paintings, right? They're polyvocal, polyvisual. There are many places to look, right? And I think that's very representative of this kind of complex real, which is the way in which we exist in the world now. It's not one thing happening at a time. It's many things happening at a time. It's you and I speaking on this stage. It's the rustling of the audience. It's the person signing next to us. It's someone looking at their cell phone right now as I speak, right? So all of these things are a kind of, these paintings are like that, right? It's all of this sort of noisiness of being, the possibility of chaos, and not chaos useless or empty, but chaos that is poetic and full.
And I love the phrase that you're using, this complex real. Again, that's something that I've thought. You've also talked about, maybe we can talk about attention a little bit.
Oh, the image only changed on your...
Oh.
There you
flip
go.
It one more? I just wanted to show a few, and maybe let's go one more. Two. There you go. Showing a couple. There's a variety, 4 works in the exhibition from the Untitled We Are Not series. I would love to hear you say more about, you've talked about the complex real, the kind of the complexity of everyday reality. But also, you've also used this phrase, geometries of attention, and I would love for you to talk about, again, that's another phrase that kind of rings true to me about, how these works focus or divert or pivot our attention in that space, and if that has a specific quality for you. But it feels like, what we devote our attention to is incredibly, incredibly meaningful.
It is meaningful, and I feel like there's I hope this language isn't grandiose, but I feel as though there's a kind of ethical responsibility or an ethical space that an artist or inhabits by demanding people's attention, saying, look at this. And that's a part of the reason why I am so dedicated to this visual project and every detail surrounding it, because I'm ultimately asking for someone to, make a trip and look at this thing, or, take a moment out of your life. Yes, it's a day, but it's also your life, and stand here in front of this thing. So, right, so I feel like there's a certain kind of responsibility of asking someone to do that. And so, which is to say, this idea of a geometry of attention has evolved, and now I very much so think about a geometry of intention. Why am I doing these things? Why am I asking people to and engage. What are we reaching for? Which is I think another way of saying, asking those questions you mentioned earlier. Who are we? What are we? What can we be?
Well, I'd like to talk a little bit about another body of work, the Black Dada drawings. There we go. I'm showing, here, we'll flip to the next one too, which are also in the same gallery as the paintings. And again, I'm going to ask just to orient people, and maybe as you could say a little bit more, it's, you're still going through a multi-layered process to produce these works, but could you say where, talk about a little bit about the fragment and where the source is a little bit different in these works than what we were talking about for We Are Not works, where the gestures, how they're slightly different and looking more maybe internally, I suppose, or at your own studio space.
Well, the Black Dada drawings and the Days paintings, which we can. Well, that's the.
Can you flip, Meredith, to the next one, please? We can come back to this one.
The studio. That is not a painting.
Yes.
That was not a painting.
These are the Untitled Days paintings.
So these works came about. So I'm driven. What drives me is curiosity. Yeah. I don't know what's going to happen when I step foot into the studio. I have no idea. It's really, the painting is a act of exploration, a perpetual act of exploration, of curious exploration. And that's one of the reasons why I use so many different kinds of mediums to make a mark: watercolor, spray paint, graphite, you name it, ink. I've tried it, different brushes, throwing paint, splattering paint, wetting the paper before you paint. Like there's so many. There's kind of like an endless things you can do. And I kind of use these methods of mark making across the different bodies of work, the We Are Not paintings, etc. And while making other bodies of work, I realized there were bodies of work within the making of the bodies of work, and that's actually how these Untitled Days paintings came about. There were all of these marginal or extraneous marks that were accumulating in the studio, and I decided, after many years of looking at these marks, these gestures, I said, well, what if I composed these? These are works. These are compositional positions or dispositions. And so, and you said this earlier, putting that which is at the margins or that which is marginalized at the center.
And I think you've also referred, that accumulation kind of goes back to what you were saying too. This accumulation of marks, ultimately, could be seen as ultimately a metaphor for, everybody's life, everybody's life story, this accumulation of marks. I feel like you've talked about them almost as in reference to maybe scars or even to, bodily accumulations.
And yes, in relationship to the body, right. And these, and kind of how we are ultimately kind of representations of temporal realities, and so are paintings. And what do I mean by that? It's not complex. Our hair goes gray, our skin sags, right? And it's time, right? And it's actually a really beautiful and profound thing that we so physically represent it, And so do paintings. They physically represent these acts, these gestures that have happened over time. And painting for me is also always this question of the body and what can, in a tender way, what can the body do? And I also am fascinated to think about how these paintings will change, how I will change as a painter, as my body changes, as I age. What can my body do? What can't it do? So that's also endlessly fascinating, and I'm curious about that reality.
I want to talk a little bit more about your material experimentation because it's so very rich. But I also wanted to go back first to the black data drawings, just because it's such an incredible part of the show, this introduction of this kind of saturated color, which is fairly new, or maybe, you coming back to it, we should say. It was there in the past. But your work has been very much characterized, at least for a decent amount of time, by this kind of relationship between black and white. But with these works, you are introducing color. So if you could say a little bit about where that idea, what the impetus for that return to these kinds of incredibly rich, beautiful colors, there's reds, golds, blues, greens throughout these works.
Well, as an artist, particularly when I'm staging an exhibition or when I'm building and developing a body of work, I'm kind of like a conductor. And, I have different notes or tools at my disposal. And one of the tools, of course, is color and also material. And I'm very interested and dedicated to only using that which is essential. And there was a moment in the past year and a half or so that, yes, a lot of the work was black and white because it needed to be. It is rich in its black and whiteness. But then I realized I needed to introduce a chromatic score to bring a different kind of intention to the other bodies of work. And so, at one point I used to define black data as a way to talk about the future while talking about the past. So it's really the perfect body of work to introduce color, because in my earlier work in, let's say, 2004, 2005, it was pregnant with color, full of color. And so, so it's also a kind of articulation of black data within the space of my work to go back to color, the past and the future. So there's something nice about that. But again, I use what is essential. If I need to use color, I use color. If I don't need to use color, I don't use color. But I also think there's something interesting about these material realities and how they're playing out in the work between, screen printing on a substrate like mylar or the ceramics, or these distinctions between painting and drawing. So, yes.
Can we move forward to a couple slides? Here, this is good. And just to point out, I want to be cognizant of our time too. You had mentioned the other kind of materials you're working. There's an incredible 50-part grid of works on mylar. Here we're showing, again, you can't tell from these slides, works that are on mirror, and these newest works too are on ceramic. Yes, so you've kind of already alluded to it, but where does ceramics, was that another, thinking through of what it would mean how to make a mark on this different kind of material? These ones in particular have a very reflective sense to them too, which feels like another interesting, it's another pivot for you in terms of this idea of sites of engagement as well for these works.
I think each material has its own alchemy or strange alchemy. And I'm, again, curious about that. The difference between using, and you can see in these two works, the same kind of geometry is at use here, the very basic, the circle, but the actual way in which they read on the surface of the work and what they do, and this question of what can art do is also something that preoccupies me. They're such different works, the ceramic has this kind of you're heating it up at these high temperatures, these glazes, and they're kind of melting, molding into the surface. And then the system of display E that's next to it, screen printing on the mirror, the image is doubling itself. The viewer is literally looking at themselves when they're looking at the work. So all of these differences matter. they're expressive and critical and generative.
And when you go see the show, these bodies of works are actually juxtaposed next to each other, which creates another kind of a level of complexity as you look across them. For the sake of time, Adam, I wanted to ask you just like maybe 2 more questions. I would love to talk about the film portraits in the show. So there's 2 film portraits. One is in our lower level video gallery, which is this absolutely mesmerizing portrait of Ruby Nell Sales, who is a public theologian and a civil rights activist. This is a work that you just finished in 2022. And then the second work is Kyle, What Is Your Name, Kyle Abraham, a portrait. And this is a work which is located in a monumental black box in our Guerin Gallery. And I wanted to ask you at first, so you started making these portraits in about 2012. Kyle Abraham is a dancer and choreographer. Could you just say a little bit about how you go about choosing your subjects? Let's start there, and I have a follow-up question.
It's all very nonsensical. For different reasons. I saw Kyle perform at the Joyce Theater in New York. He did a solo dance called Indie, and he had this incredible costume, which you'll see him wearing in What Is Your Name? And one of the things he did in that performance is he did this. There's a term people use, and I'm unable to recall it in this moment. But in that dance, he explores a different sets of identities, different articulations or code switching. Thank you, Meredith. Different manifestations of masculinity, femininity, etc. And that fascinated me, that this idea of who Kyle was not finite or fixed. It was fluid and literally happening in front of our eyes. So that's why I invited him. I said, I want to explore that theme more. So the idea with Kyle was really just, I think I reached out to him and I said, why don't you put on that costume and I'll film you, right? That's really quite basic. And he's like, what? And, then it evolves from there. But these portraits, I've had such incredible collaborative and generous and deep moments with Kyle and with Ruby, this kind of spiritual generosity from these subjects that I've had the opportunity to work with in film. Someone earlier said to me that the portraits are very protective of their subjects, and I would have to agree with that. Protective not in the sense that because I want to represent them as complex and complicated beings, and I also want to be respectful of their humanity.
And they are incredibly beautiful and moving, both of them. And they're both very unique experiences, the way that they are in the exhibition. And I think the last maybe point that I want to point out, they're portraits, but they're also conversations. So you don't appear in the films, but you are asking questions. You are prompting a conversation and a dialogue with both figures, which is, I just want you to say a little, it's like conversation and dialogue seem also a central thread in all of your work, in your book projects as well, even in the way that you think about exhibitions, the way, you are very actively thinking about the viewer, this compositional logic of we. There's not really a question in there, but it's just, I wanted to point that out. If you have any thoughts about, your whole approach to art making feels very conversational too. You're always in dialogue with a lot of different interlocutors, not just with the portraits, but in terms of, other kind of scholars and theorists, the way you put together your anthologies as well.
I think something at my core as an artist is being aware and cognizant of this idea of an audience someday, which is to say that someday someone might stand in front of this. And believe that one of the things I want to offer and put out into the world is this simple but generative idea of I want to have a conversation with you.
And with that, let's open it up to questions from the audience, please.
But not a long one.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead. Yes, you with the hat on.
Early on, you were talking, it seemed to me at least, you were talking about negation and abstraction in similar ways as both being opportunities for maybe counterintuitive opportunities for kind of a realism and kind of vitality. Do you think about abstraction and negation in similar ways, or are they two opportunities that, you know, by happenstance coincide?
I think it's a deliberate relationship on the one hand, but I'm not suggesting that abstraction is negation. I'm actually saying abstraction is representation, is an authentic, complex form of representation. But I do feel as though a conception or an understanding of negation fits into that dynamic. Yes.
Now that the exhibition is open, can you share some of your reflections seen finished?
Absolutely. So this is there's a few reflections. One of them is finally seeing Kyle at, is it 18 feet or 19? The projection 16 feet. I always, how? 15 feet 8 inches. So we'll call it 16 feet. I've never seen it at this scale, which is how I always imagined and intended it to be, and it's awesome. And I also, another reflection is visual anthology, #1. So it's the first of a project that I will likely continue. And this is such a unique opportunity because of the spaces here to see that work hung 5 rows tall. And that has been really incredible. And also visual anthology, seeing how it really is a visual anthology and how these marks and these gestures, these ways of making marks and gestures really do spread out into all of the bodies of work, all of the works that are on display, the We Are Not paintings, the Days paintings, the Black Dotted drawings, and to see how everything becomes both specific and conflated at the same time is really rich and rewarding to see.
Thank you for this beautiful, beautiful show. Are you open to a question about some of your older work?
Sure.
I'm really curious about the archive that you've been compiled from, I guess, sort of art historical texts that you were integrating into the Black Dada and also Who is Queen. And I wondered if you could share a little bit, sort of both the visual images of the masks and also the textual aspects of it. I was wondering if you could sort of talk a little bit about your thought process about engaging that and whether that's in continuity with your engagement with Lewitt or if that's a different project.
I don't know exactly what you're referring to, but making the readers, like the Black Dada reader and the Who is Queen reader, that combine these different texts from different moments in history and different authors, are really the body of knowledge that attend to the work. And I think in the past several years, I've realize that a part of the body of knowledge that attends to the work is the work itself. And I think that that's really where this exhibition kind of how it pushes things forward or articulates what I've moved into, is realizing that there's a kind of rich visual index that surrounds the work, and using that as a kind of a means and methods of inform making. Hi, Jane.
I worked with Meredith and Adam and the team on the catalog that is accompanying this exhibition, and it'll be published in November. And from my perspective, I learn about your work through other people's thoughts and writings and ideas, and I always look forward with all the projects to encountering the work individually. When I go in and see how I experience it, and back to your point about the Kyle Abraham video, I knew it was going to be intense just because of the size of this huge black box that's been such a focus of the installation of this exhibition. But when I went in, and it's huge, and it's dark, and there's this giant black body in pieces and this disjointed narrative. What I hadn't expected was maybe, I don't know how you did it, but the handheld camera and how what you're looking at kind of shifts. And that was another level of disorientation. And I was wondering, I know you don't have intention that things unfold, but did you think about how that would sort of off-put and disorient the viewer, as well as the other sort of syncopated disjunction in the work?
Well, I think there's many ways to think about Kyle in that piece. And I think one of the most interesting ways to think about him in that work is as a line, his body as a line. And then when he moves, he's a line moving in space. And then what is happening in all of the works, in the paintings and the drawings, is that these marks, one could say, are lines. And they too are moving in space in different ways. And I think anything moving in space is arguably disorienting. But yes, I think I am done speaking. I think we should go see the show before there's nothing to see.